Brian Chesky's story begins in the quiet suburbs of Niskayuna, New York, a place where creativity mattered just as much as academics. His parents, both social workers, believed deeply in kindness and empathy, and they raised Brian with the gentle expectation that he should always think about how his actions affected others. From a young age, he showed a fascination with drawing, building, and imagining worlds that did not yet exist. While other children played sports or collected toys, Brian spent hours sketching designs, making models, and studying objects with curiosity. Creativity wasn't just a hobby for him, it was the lens through which he understood the world. Growing up, Brian often felt different from the people around him. He wasn't the loudest or the most confident child, and he sometimes struggled to fit in socially. But these feelings didn't discourage him. Instead, they sharpened his ability to observe quietly and understand others on a deeper level. He learned early that empathy could be a strength, that noticing small details about people could help him connect with them in ways that felt meaningful and genuine. Brian's interest in design grew stronger as he got older. He became fascinated with how objects, spaces, and experiences could affect human behavior. Chairs, buildings, even everyday items. He studied them all with the seriousness of someone trying to understand how the world was built. His parents encouraged his curiosity, even when it seemed unusual. They believed that following his artistic instincts would eventually lead him somewhere important, even if the path wasn't clear yet. During high school, Brian began to understand that creativity could be more than a personal passion. It could be a future. Teachers noticed his unique perspective and encouraged him to pursue design professionally. While many of his peers focused on traditional careers, Brian dreamed of attending the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most respected art schools in the country. It was an ambitious goal, but Brian felt a quiet certainty that it was where he belonged. He applied with a portfolio full of drawings and ideas that reflected his imagination, not his certainty. When he was accepted into RISD, Brian stepped into a world where creativity was the norm, not the exception. Surrounded by artists, designers, and thinkers, he felt himself come alive in ways he never had before. Classes were intense, critiques were honest, and the environment pushed him to grow creatively and emotionally. It was here that Brian learned one of the most important principles of design. Great ideas begin with understanding people. This belief would eventually become the foundation of Airbnb. At RISD, Brian developed a deeper appreciation for the way design shaped experiences. He studied not only form and function, but also human connection, how a feeling of comfort, belonging, or inspiration could emerge from thoughtful choices. He learned how to listen, how to interpret needs that weren't spoken out loud, and how to translate emotions into design. These lessons were subtle at the time, but they would later become essential to his leadership style. Outside of the classroom, Brian struggled with the same uncertainty that many young creatives face. He questioned his future, wondered whether his passion for artistic thinking would translate into a stable career, and tried to ignore the quiet doubts that suggested he might never make it. But every time he considered giving up, he returned to one simple belief: creativity was his calling. No matter how unclear the path felt, he trusted that design would guide him forward. After graduating, Brian left RISD with a degree, a head full of big ideas, and almost no money. The real world was far more challenging than the classrooms he had come from. He applied for design jobs, struggled to pay rent, and realized that life after art school wasn't as glamorous as many imagined. Yet, through the uncertainty, he held on to the values he learned growing up: empathy, resilience, and the quiet belief that creativity could solve even the most difficult problems. Those early struggles would soon lead him toward an idea that would change not just his life, but the way millions of people travel and connect around the world. But for now, he was simply a young designer trying to understand where he fit in a world that often overlooked people like him, quiet, creative, and determined to build something meaningful. After graduating from RIS, Brian Chesky entered adulthood with creativity, ambition, and almost no financial safety net. He moved to Los Angeles hoping to find work as an industrial designer, but the reality of starting a career hit him harder than expected. The jobs he imagined weren't available, and the ones he could get barely covered basic expenses. Rent, bills, and the rising cost of living created a constant pressure that weighed on him every day. He felt the uncertainty that so many young creatives face, the fear of wanting something meaningful but not knowing how to reach it. During this period, Brian struggled with confidence. He watched friends find stable jobs while he bounced between temporary roles that didn't pay enough or align with his passion. But even in this difficult chapter, he held on to a quiet belief that creativity still mattered. He reminded himself that his path didn't need to look like everyone else's. Sometimes, he thought, the most meaningful journeys start with confusion. This mindset helped him stay patient, even when everything felt uncertain. Everything changed when Brian received a call from his college roommate and close friend, Joe Gebbia. Joe had moved to San Francisco, a city bursting with energy, startups, and rising innovation. He told Brian there was extra space in his apartment and encouraged him to move out there. At first, Brian hesitated. The rent was too high and his income too low. But something about the idea sparked a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. He decided to take the risk and move. When Brian arrived in San Francisco, reality hit immediately. He barely had enough money to cover the first month's rent. His design career still hadn't taken off. And the city, beautiful, fast, and filled with dreamers, felt overwhelming. But Brian and Joe shared something powerful, the belief that creativity could lead to opportunity. They were both struggling, both broke, and both quietly determined to make something meaningful happen. Then came the moment that changed everything. A large design conference was coming to San Francisco, and every hotel in the city was fully booked. Brian and Joe realized they couldn't afford rent, but they did have extra floor space, and a simple idea emerged. What if they hosted travelers by offering air mattresses in their apartment and serving breakfast in the morning? It wasn't a grand vision, it wasn't even a business plan, it was a survival idea, born from desperation and a bit of creativity. They named it Airbed and Breakfast. 3 guests came. Brian cleaned the apartment, set up the airbeds, designed a simple website, and welcomed strangers into their home. It was awkward, risky, and uncertain, but something special happened. The guests connected with them. They shared stories, meals, and conversations that felt more meaningful than the typical hotel experience. Brian realized that what they had created wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a feeling, belonging, comfort, and human connection. The success of that weekend didn't solve their financial problems, but it planted a seed. Brian began to wonder if other people in other cities might want experiences like this too. Yet the idea still felt fragile, almost too strange to share. Renting out airbeds to strangers didn't sound like a credible business, but Brian held on to the idea because he felt something deeper behind it, a sense of community, generosity, and togetherness that aligned with his values. Trying to turn Airbed and Breakfast into something real proved harder than Brian imagined. They pitched investors, but almost everyone dismissed them. People laughed at the concept. Some said it was unsafe, unrealistic, or simply foolish. Brian and his co-founders left meetings feeling discouraged but strangely motivated. Each rejection reminded them that the world often misunderstands new ideas at first. And Brian believed that just because others couldn't see the vision didn't mean the vision was wrong. Their finances got worse. They were nearly out of money and the company felt close to collapse. But Brian's resilience kept the team together. He didn't panic or walk away. Instead, he asked a simple question. What else can we try? That question led them to one of the strangest and most creative decisions of their lives, selling limited edition cereal boxes to raise money during the 2008 US election. Obama O's and Cap'n McCain. It was absurd. And it worked. They made enough money to survive a little longer. This small victory gave Brian something he desperately needed. Hope. Not certainty, not success. Just hope. And sometimes hope is enough to keep moving forward. That belief would carry him into the next chapter of his journey, where the idea, born from air mattresses and desperation, would transform into one of the most impactful companies of the modern era. When Brian and his co-founders walked into Y Combinator, the prestigious startup accelerator, they carried more doubt than confidence. They had been rejected by dozens of investors, and the idea of strangers sleeping in other people's homes sounded strange to almost everyone. But the YC partners saw something different. They saw 3 founders who refused to quit, who kept showing up even when the world dismissed them. Brian's quiet determination, his ability to stay calm under pressure, and his belief in people made a strong impression. During the program, Brian learned that startups weren't built through sudden success. They were built through persistence. Every week, the team returned to their tiny apartment to meet real customers, listen to their experiences, and make improvements. They didn't try to scale quickly. They focused on understanding one person at a time. Brian believed that if they could create a magical experience for 10 people, they could eventually create one for millions. This philosophy of human-centered design became the heart of Airbnb. As Airbnb slowly grew, Brian faced endless challenges that tested both his leadership and his confidence. Users broke things, hosts complained, guests had bad experiences, there were legal questions, regulatory pushback, and sleepless nights filled with uncertainty. But through it all, Brian stayed calm. He believed in the mission, not just to provide places to stay, but to help people feel like they belonged anywhere in the world. This belief gave him the strength to keep working through every setback. One of the biggest obstacles came from cities that didn't understand the concept. Many regulators saw Airbnb as a threat to hotels and existing laws. The company received cease and desist letters and faced legal battles that could have ended everything. Brian approached each issue with patience and empathy. Instead of fighting aggressively, he chose to listen. He wanted to understand why people feared Airbnb and what the team could do to address those concerns. Over time, this approach helped build bridges instead of walls. Even as tensions rose and pressure increased, Brian maintained a leadership style grounded in humility. He wasn't the type to bark orders or make emotional decisions. Instead, he stayed connected to the purpose behind the company. He and his team traveled to meet hosts, visited homes, and listened to stories from people around the world. These experiences reminded Brian that Airbnb wasn't just a business. It was a community built on trust, kindness, and human connection. That perspective anchored him during the most difficult moments. As the company expanded globally, Brian's role grew more complex. He now led teams across continents, navigated cultural differences, and made decisions that affected millions of users. Yet he still approached leadership like a designer, thoughtfully, intentionally, and with an eye for detail. He asked questions others overlooked, focusing on how decisions made people feel. This instinct helped Airbnb maintain a sense of warmth and humanity, even as it became a major global platform. But growth brought new challenges. Competitors emerged, investors demanded results, and the pace of expansion threatened to overwhelm the team. Brian realized that building a company wasn't just about managing systems, it was about protecting the soul of the mission. He worked to reinforce Airbnb's values, reminding everyone that hospitality was about people, not profits. He believed that if they stayed true to their purpose, success would follow naturally. Throughout these years, Brian also faced personal doubts. He questioned whether he was capable enough, experienced enough, or strong enough to lead a company that was becoming a global phenomenon. But he never let those doubts define him. Instead, he treated them as quiet reminders to keep learning. He read constantly, sought mentorship, and stayed open to feedback. Brian believed that humility was a strength, not a weakness. As Airbnb reached new milestones, millions of listings, global recognition, and a rapidly expanding community, Brian felt both pride and responsibility. He knew that the platform was changing the way people traveled, connected, and saw the world. He understood that meaningful innovation always came with challenges, but he also knew that the company's greatest strength was its ability to stay focused on belonging. That belief would soon face its greatest test. By early 2020, Airbnb had become a global force, millions of hosts, millions of guests, and a community that stretched across nearly every country in the world. Brian felt proud, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. He knew that building something meaningful required constant care. The company had expanded quickly, and with success came complexity. Brian's focus was shifting from growth to preservation, how to protect the heart of what Airbnb was built on, belonging. Then, almost overnight, everything collapsed. The COVID-19 pandemic brought global travel to a halt. Reservations across Airbnb fell by more than 80%. Hosts lost income, guests cancelled trips, and the company's future was suddenly in jeopardy. Brian watched years of progress evaporate in a matter of weeks. It wasn't just a business crisis, it was emotional, overwhelming, and deeply personal. Airbnb was not a company built from money, it was built from trust, homes, and real people's livelihoods. In those early days, Brian made some of the hardest decisions of his life. Airbnb had to downsize, cut costs, and restructure quickly to survive. He worked day and night, not from a place of fear, but from a place of responsibility. He understood that every decision affected thousands of lives. When layoffs became unavoidable, Brian chose a path few CEOs take. He led with transparency, compassion, and extraordinary generosity. He wrote heartfelt messages, offered extended benefits, and personally reached out to employees. He never hid behind corporate language. He acted with humanity. Those decisions marked a turning point. Airbnb's culture, though shaken, remained grounded in trust. Hosts continued to support the platform. Employees, even those who left, spoke about the company with warmth. Guests slowly returned when travel restrictions eased, and Brian found himself rebuilding the company from the inside out, simplifying its vision, reducing complexity, and returning to the core values that had guided Airbed and Breakfast from day one: creativity, community, and belonging. As the world adapted, Airbnb experienced a quiet resurgence. People began traveling differently, staying longer, living in new cities, seeking comfort outside traditional hotels. The platform became not just a travel tool, but a lifestyle. And Brian approached this new era with calm clarity. Instead of chasing rapid expansion, he focused on strengthening trust, improving host protections, and refining the guest experience. He wanted Airbnb to feel human, welcoming, and warm at every touchpoint. In 2020, Airbnb went public in one of the most remarkable IPOs in modern history. The company, once nearly bankrupt, achieved a valuation few thought possible. But Brian didn't celebrate with extravagance. He kept the moment grounded, telling his team that the IPO was not the end of their journey, it was simply a chapter. He thanked his co-founders, his employees, and the hosts who had opened their homes to strangers. He reminded everyone that Airbnb existed because people believed in each other. As Airbnb continued to grow, Brian remained deeply involved in design, community building, and long-term strategy. He stayed connected to his creative roots, sketching ideas, refining products, and focusing on the emotional experience of travel. He believed that great companies are not built from technology alone, but from understanding the human heart. That perspective shaped Airbnb's evolution, guiding decisions with warmth and empathy rather than pressure or fear. Looking back, Brian often spoke about how unlikely his journey had been. A kid who loved drawing, a designer with no money, a struggling renter in San Francisco, and eventually the CEO of a company that reimagined how the world travels. He believed that creativity, empathy, and resilience were far more powerful than traditional definitions of success. And he proved that even the most unconventional ideas can change the world when pursued with intention. Brian Chesky's story is a reminder that the path to meaning is rarely straight. It twists, stumbles, pauses, and breathes. It asks you to trust your vision even when others don't understand it. It asks you to stay gentle in a world that often rewards force. And it asks you to lead with heart, especially when life becomes uncertain. As this documentary comes to a close, take a slow breath and let the softness of Brian's journey settle around you. Let it remind you that your creativity matters, your ideas matter, and your resilience matters. Wherever you are on your own path, trust that you are growing in ways you cannot yet see. Good night.